You were taught to earn. They were taught to own. You were taught to save. They were taught to position. You were taught that wealth is built. They have always known it is inherited, not merely in gold, but in thinking. The families who have held power across centuries did not stumble upon some fortunate secret. They codified it. They passed it down in drawing rooms you were never invited into, in conversations that stopped the moment someone like you entered the room. What you call financial advice, they call it noise for the masses. Today, for reasons I shall not fully explain, you will hear what was never meant for you. Number 1. Wealth whispers. Poverty performs. Notice the person who walks into the room and immediately tells you what they drive, what they earned last quarter, what their portfolio is doing. Notice how desperately they need you to know. This is what separates old money from new money. And the difference is not the money, it is the thinking. The newly wealthy perform. The generationally wealthy disappear. Most people believe that the visible markers of success, the watch, the car, the carefully curated lifestyle, are the destination. They have been conditioned to believe this, because visibility was always the only form of wealth available to them. You cannot display what you do not have, and so display becomes the language of aspiration. But here is what they never teach you in school, what no financial advisor will sit down and explain. The families who have held quiet power across centuries considered visibility a form of exposure, not a reward, a vulnerability. The Rothschilds operated by a private maxim that has survived longer than most nations. One version of it, passed through their correspondence, advised that the time to buy is when there is blood in the streets, including, it was implied, your own. What this reveals is not cruelty, it is composure. The wealthy have known for centuries that emotional neutrality is a financial instrument, and that the moment you perform your wealth, you have already surrendered its most powerful quality, its invisibility. This is the mindset shift that changes everything. Silence is not absence. Discretion is not humility. Old money learned long ago that the greatest fortunes are the ones nobody is counting except the family that holds them. Most people will never understand this, and that is exactly by design. The performance of wealth was always meant to keep the ambitious occupied, chasing symbols while the dynasties accumulated the substance behind closed doors. You now hold something most people spend their entire lives walking past without ever seeing. The question is whether you will keep reading, because the next principle goes even further into how these families think. It concerns something far more dangerous than money. It concerns who they allow to know them at all. Number 2, your children are the real investment. The ordinary person saves for retirement. The dynasty builds for resurrection. Most people, when they think about providing for their children, think about comfort. A good school, a safety net, perhaps a modest inheritance if the numbers allow for it. This is not generational thinking. This is generational sentiment. And there's a difference so vast between the two that it explains, almost entirely, why wealth concentrates in the same bloodlines across centuries, while everyone else resets to zero with every generation. The wealthy have known for centuries that a child is not simply a dependent. A child is a vehicle, a continuation, a second attempt with better information. And this is what they never teach you in school. That old money families did not merely pass down assets. They passed down architecture, the thinking, the positioning, the invisible map of how power actually moves through the world. Consider the Medici themselves. At the height of their influence, Cosimo de' Medici did not simply accumulate wealth. He placed his descendants inside institutions, inside the church, inside political structures, inside the marriages that would determine which families held authority for the next 200 years. He was not investing in comfort. He was engineering continuity. And the returns on that thinking are still being felt today. This is the mindset shift that changes everything. The difference is not the money. It is the thinking, specifically the timeline the thinking operates on. Most people plan in years. Old money plans and lifetimes. The child does not inherit the gold. The child inherits the judgment to know what gold is for. Most people will never understand this, and that is exactly by design. Bloodline thinking was never meant to be democratized. It was meant to remain the private logic of families who understood that the greatest investment you will ever make cannot be tracked on any market. It is the mind you shape before the world gets the chance to reshape it for you. What comes next concerns something these families protected even more carefully than their children. It concerns what they chose never to say out loud. Number 3, concealment is a financial instrument. The ordinary person believes transparency is a virtue. The dynasty knows it is a liability. There is a particular innocence in how most people approach their finances, posting their wins, sharing their milestones, announcing their ambitions to anyone who will listen. They were taught that openness builds trust, and that trust builds opportunity. And on the surface, this is not entirely wrong. But there is a layer beneath the surface that the wealthy have known for centuries. One that reframes everything you thought you understood about why certain families remain untouchable while others, despite equal talent and equal effort, are quietly dismantled. What cannot be seen cannot be targeted. This is not a modern insight. It is the oldest operating principle of durable wealth, and old money families codified it long before there were financial regulators, inheritance disputes, or algorithmic surveillance to justify it. They practiced concealment not because they had something to hide, but because visibility itself was understood to be a form of invitation. An invitation to scrutiny, to envy, to the slow institutional pressure that grinds down anyone foolish enough to stand fully in the light. In Renaissance Florence, the Medici Bank operated across 17 countries under structures deliberately designed to obscure who held ultimate authority. Machiavelli himself noted that the prince who is seen too clearly is the prince most easily opposed. Concealment was not deception. It was architecture. And that architecture is still being used today in ways most people will never recognize, which is exactly by design. This is the mindset shift that changes everything. The difference is not the money, it is the thinking, specifically the understanding that information about your wealth is itself a form of wealth, and that broadcasting it is the same as spending it carelessly. Most people will never understand this because they were taught that success should be visible. Old money was taught that success should be structural, silent, embedded in arrangements that require no announcement because they require no approval. You now hold the third principle. The next one concerns time, and how these families learn to use patience as a weapon that most people never even see coming. Number 4, the long game requires no urgency. The ordinary person is always in a hurry. The dynasty has never needed to be. Watch how urgency operates in the lives of most people, and you will find, without exception, that it is the invisible signature of scarcity. The rushed decision, the opportunity that had to be seized immediately or lost forever. The investment that could not wait. Urgency feels like ambition from the inside, but from the outside, from the elevated position these families have always occupied, it looks precisely like what it is. Panic dressed in the language of opportunity. And panic, the dynasties learned long ago, is the single most reliable mechanism for transferring wealth from those who need returns quickly to those who are content to wait indefinitely. This is what separates old money from new money. And the difference is not the money. It is the thinking, specifically the relationship each has with time. New money treats time as a pressure. Old money treats it as an ally that compounds silently, while everyone else exhausts themselves chasing quarterly returns and overnight transformations. The House of Bardi, the great Florentine banking family that preceded even the Medici in financial dominance, extended credit across decades to monarchs and kingdoms. Not because they were generous, but because they understood that a debtor who cannot repay immediately will eventually repay everything, with interest, with influence, with access. They were not waiting. They were positioning. And the distinction between those two things is what they never teach you in school. This is the mindset shift that changes everything. Patience in the hands of old money is not passive. It is the most aggressive financial posture available because it operates on a timeline that most competitors will simply abandon before the returns arrive. Most people will never understand this, and that is exactly by design. The system rewards urgency because urgency is productive, and productive people build wealth for those patient enough to own the structures they work inside. You now understand 4 principles. The 5th concerns something even more fundamental. The mechanism these families used to ensure the work was never truly theirs to do it all. Number 5, systems serve you. Labor serves others. The ordinary person was taught that hard work is the path to wealth. The dynasty was taught that hard work is what you purchase from others. There is nothing cruel in stating this plainly. It is simply the architecture of how wealth has always functioned. And the sooner you understand it, the sooner you stop confusing effort with ownership. Most people spend their entire lives becoming more valuable to a system they will never control, refining their skills, extending their hours, optimizing their output. And they call this building a future. The dynasties call it something else entirely. They call it labor. And labor, in the private language of old money, is what the system consumes so that those who built the system do not have to be consumed themselves. This is what separates old money from new money. And the difference is not the money. It is the thinking, specifically the understanding that your time is either an asset you deploy or a resource someone else harvests. There is no third option. And the question these families asked across generations was never, how do we work harder? It was always, how do we construct something that works without us? The Medici did not personally move gold across 17 countries. They built correspondent banking networks, systems of trust, obligation, and structured incentive that moved it for them. Giovanni di Bicci de' Medici, the founder of the dynasty's financial empire, understood before the vocabulary existed that a mechanism, once correctly built, does not require its architect to remain present. The system breathes, the system earns, the system persists, and the family simply governs it from a comfortable distance. This is the mindset shift that changes everything. Most people will never understand this, and that is exactly by design, because a world full of system builders would leave no one willing to supply the labor those systems require. You were educated to be skilled. They were educated to be scarce, to own the thing that skilled people cannot function without. One principle remains, and it is perhaps the most dangerous of all, because it concerns power that leaves no evidence it was ever used. Number 6, power is invisible until it is needed. The ordinary person displays power to be taken seriously. The dynasty conceals it to remain dangerous. Most people, when they accumulate influence, cannot resist the gravitational pull of demonstration. They need the title visible on the door, the name attached to the decision, the credit assigned correctly and publicly. This is not ambition. This is insecurity wearing ambition's clothing. And the dynasties identified this weakness centuries ago, not to judge it, but to use it, because the person who needs to be seen as powerful has already revealed the precise location of everything they value. They have handed you the map to their vulnerability and called it a reputation. This is what separates old money from new money. And the difference is not the money, it is the thinking, specifically the understanding that power announced is power already beginning to erode. True influence, the kind that has survived republics and revolutions and the slow collapse of empires, never required a public face. It required something far more difficult to acquire and infinitely harder to dismantle. It required indispensability, the arrangement that cannot function without your quiet participation, the relationship that ensures the outcome regardless of who believes they are making the decision. Cosimo de' Medici governed Florence for over 30 years without ever formally holding its highest office. He operated from behind titled men, elected officials, appointed representatives, none of whom fully understood the degree to which their authority flowed from his continued approval. Machiavelli studied this and recorded it with cold precision. The prince who rules visibly rules only as long as his visibility is tolerated. The prince who rules invisibly rules indefinitely. They never teach this in school because institutions require visible authority to function. But the wealthy have known for centuries that visible authority is the costume, not the crown. This is the mindset shift that changes everything. Most people will never understand this, and that is exactly by design. The powerful do not announce themselves. They're simply present in the outcome, unnamed, undetected, undisturbed. You have now been given all 6 principles. The question that remains is the only one that has ever mattered inside these walls. Not whether you understand them, but whether you're prepared to use them. You have now passed through the 6 chambers of this particular education. Most will watch this and feel something shift, a quiet recognition that the world was always operating on 2 sets of rules simultaneously, and that they were handed only one. The dynasties did not build their permanence through harder effort or fortunate circumstance. They built it through a different quality of thinking entirely, longer, quieter, more deliberate, and utterly invisible to those still measuring success in single lifetimes. The blueprint was never hidden. It was simply placed where the impatient would never think to look. You have looked. What you do with this knowledge will separate you from every person who scrolled past this video without pausing. Subscribe to the Medici Code. The next lesson concerns something the old families considered far more valuable than money, and far more dangerous in the wrong hands.